What's an assault rifle?
Like one of them really large guns.
Let me ask you, are you aware of what the differentiation is between automatic and semi-automatic?
No.
People either have the right to protect themselves or they don't. And there is no data to say that stripping people of the right to self-protection would make us safer. So for this week's installment of Change My Mind, we decided to revisit the very topical issue of gun control and the Second Amendment. Matter of fact, we returned to UT Dallas, where we conducted our last segment on this topic to see if anything had changed. And I don't want nobody. Now, we're going to get to the two fully unedited interviews in a second. That's the whole purpose of Change My Mind, to see what real conversations in real time, how they unfold. But two things that really struck me first. Number one, in a day full of conversations, it seemed that none of the even highly educated students knew anything about basic proper firearm classifications or terminology.
Well, I know fully automatic is the one that is like restricted.
Or an assault rifle. Like, why does someone need that?
Or an assault rifle, or an automatic machine gun, or
ARs. The same assault rifle that was used in the recent Florida shooting.
And two, everyone wanted to talk about Florida, obviously, but shockingly, not a single student, not one, had ever heard of the far deadlier Sutherland Springs shooting, which took place in their own backyard. Remember the Sutherland Springs shooting? That was right here in Texas. Mm-hmm. You know what happened there, right? Does the name Stephen Williford mean anything to you?
No.
Do you remember the Sutherland Springs shooting? No. Does the name Stephen Williford mean anything to you? Okay. You remember the Sutherland Springs shooting?
I've heard of it just now with the other girl.
From me?
Yeah, from you.
Absolutely terrifying. How could they not know of a shooting with 26 deaths, another 20 injured, which occurred only 4 hours away, in which the shooter was stopped by an NRA-certified instructor with an AR-15, a national hero, mind you, Stephen Williford. But I repeat myself. On with the conversations. Okay, sir, what was your name again?
Mawad.
Mawad.
Yes.
All right. Mawad. I've asserted my position, I think, hopefully pretty clearly. Mm-hmm. Changed my mind.
So what do you think about Australia? 1996.
What about Australia?
When they
buy back?
Yeah.
I think it's terrible.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Why?
I think a gun ban stripping citizens of the right to protect themselves, I think that's an immoral act.
But I mean, what if you look at the statistics behind that?
Mm-hmm.
The decline of, shootings, deaths by gun, it's probably much less than we have per day here. No, what?
No, it didn't have a statistical effect on violent crime or even gun crime. Matter of fact.
Then what about the online articles that suggest otherwise?
We've written plenty of them as well over at louderwithkyler.com. Mm-hmm. And something even more fascinating, there's an overall decrease in violent crime. There's an overall decrease often in gun crime. Mm-hmm. And in New Zealand, where they didn't have a mandatory buyback, mm-hmm. you saw the same kind of overall trends. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think it's horrible. I think we both admit it's a ban.
Okay.
Was it right?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was considered a buyback, which has been proposed here. It was a mandatory buyback. Mm-hmm. So that's a gun ban. Mm-hmm. So I guess my question to you would be, would you like to do that in the United States?
I would love to be honest, personally.
Just ban guns?
Honestly, I understand it's fun shooting a gun. I've been to a gun range before. There's a nice adrenaline feeling when you're shooting at a target, and it's just satisfying when you hit the middle of the target, and it's just like any other sport, sure, per se, but I feel like we would gain so much more as a country in the long run if you're thinking of a bigger picture, like less possibilities of psychos killing people like in Las Vegas, or just most recently where 17 people died in a school. Right. Honestly, if I were to give up my favorite hobby, playing soccer, if that meant that hundreds of people wouldn't die, I would gladly do it any day because I love my country that much.
Great. What do you believe the Second Amendment is about?
The right to bear arms, to protect yourself, and that's pretty much what I know. I'm really ignorant on this, if I'm honest. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, listen, I appreciate you sitting down. Mm-hmm. I don't mean to be contentious, but you mentioned it as a hobby. Mm-hmm. So, the First Amendment.
Okay.
Right? The right to freedom of speech. Mm-hmm. Do you believe that's absolute? Do you believe that you should have the right to speak freely without having that be infringed upon by the government?
Definitely.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And why do you believe that?
Because just being able to express your beliefs publicly and having that as, a freedom is essential to the development of democracy in a country.
But where do you get that from?
In what sense? What do you mean?
Well, where do you get the right to the freedom of speech? You said you believe that is fundamental. You believe that that's very important to a democracy or to a constitutional republic. I just gave you a hint there in that.
It's in the Constitution.
Yeah. Okay. So you're right to freedom, because the freedom of speech is not absolute. It doesn't exist across many other countries, including free countries, including Australia. By the way, you don't have the right to free speech in Australia.
Okay.
So you believe the right to freedom of speech is absolute because of the Constitution, the First Amendment. Amendment number 2 is what?
The right to bear arms.
Okay.
So did the Australians amend their whatever constitution they have when they had that buyback?
I can't speak to the specifics of all elements of the Australian Constitution.
Okay.
Now, I do know, again, that where I come from, for example, in Canada, you can be jailed for speech that's offensive, or you can be fined. So we decided to do things differently from many places in Europe, and certainly Australia as it relates to freedom of speech, as well as the Second Amendment. But I think it's important. You just said you believe freedom of speech is absolute. Why? Because you accept the premise that these rights, as recognized by the Constitution, are fundamental human rights.
So when it comes to the life of our citizens,
yes,
do you not believe that we have, let's say, what if, just, in general, when it comes to protecting the lives of citizens and immigrants and anyone who lives in America, when it comes to that, do you believe that there should be some flexibility in our Constitution to protect our people? So.
Well, first off, a couple of key issues there, right?
Okay.
You would have to open it wide, and now all of a sudden nothing is absolute. So your freedom of speech is not absolute. So you would have to be comfortable with that. Secondly, it's based on this premise that we would save lives by removing the Second Amendment, which I don't agree with. But let's go with number 1. Do you see what a problem that is if you just say, well, let's hold on a second because we think we can be safer. Let's give up this fundamental right to protection as recognized in the Second Amendment. Can we acknowledge or maybe find common ground there? That'd be a real problem because it's the same Constitution that affords you and I the right to do what we're doing right now.
I mean, I understand that wholeheartedly, but if we're thinking of the bigger picture here, where, I've seen things on social media where people believe that teachers should have guns, and so do you just, as a human being, do you think that the amount of shootings that we have every day in our country would decrease if we had a buyback? Just thinking, basic common sense.
Okay, so I want to make sure that we're clear here. We've hopscotched past the idea of human rights. It seems like that's not an area you're super comfortable with. Because now you're talking about stripping someone of their fundamental right to self-protection.
Is having a gun...
if it saves someone else's life.
Why not?
Why not?
Why not, take that step as a country?
Take that step as a country.
Yeah, so why
removing someone's right to protect themselves.
Protect themselves from what? So explain to me, since I'm...
So the Second Amendment. So you, I don't
because all
mean
I've
to be
heard is
smart-ass.
no, you do your thing, man.
Okay, so the Second Amendment. You want me to explain what it is?
No, yeah, sure.
Okay, so the Second Amendment was designed to allow citizens to protect themselves both from internal and external threats. That means the right to protect, obviously, their home, property, but mainly to protect themselves from a tyrannical government.
Okay.
Because they fled a tyrannical government, they fought them off, right? These were basically unorganized militias. Who is a militia? It's everyone. You and I are the militia. And the only way to ensure that there can be a well-regulated militia, meaning a capable militia, is that all citizens have the right, law-abiding citizens, to keep and bear arms. That's what it was designed to do. You're proposing giving the government the very fail-safe it's designed against, to protect against a tyrannical government. You're saying, let's give the government the authority to strip people of rights. That's like a feedback loop of just a violation of human rights on a scale that I don't think you might know.
So you personally, do you think having the right to free speech is more important than having the right to a gun?
No. I think they're both equally important.
You think they're both equally important?
Yes.
So you think, for the development of our country, it's essential to have guns and free speech, and you think they're on the same level in a scale?
I think the right to own and keep firearms.
So it's more of like a right thing.
Yes.
For you. Okay. Well, why is it just America that we have tens of thousands of deaths per year?
It's not.
It is on it. If you look at statistics.
No, we're not even top 25.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we're not even top 25 when it comes to firearm deaths. We are the most armed populace, but we're not even the top country for mass shootings. Matter of fact, we're behind Norway and France, even though more people here have guns.
I don't know. I think
we're
never
28.
heard of these statistics before, honestly. I don't know where you get yours from, because all of the ones that I've seen show that America is always topping that list.
Okay. Well, let's say we're able to show you statistics afterward.
Okay, sure.
Let's assume that those are correct. Okay. It still doesn't get to the question. Let's assume none of them are correct. What
Okay.
gives you the right, or what gives anyone here the right, to strip someone of their ability to protect themselves?
So why don't we dissect that a little? What are we protecting ourselves from? I know you mentioned it from internal and external
Yes.
threats. So what are those threats?
Tyrannical government.
Okay,
first
we
and
went-
foremost,
yeah, okay.
And then, of course, the ability to protect yourself from anyone who wants to do you harm, from evil people who are willing to commit harm.
I mean, I don't know why that should, have anything to do with being able to own an assault rifle or an automatic machine gun or anything like that.
Okay, first off, a couple things there. What's an assault rifle?
Like one of them really large guns.
Okay. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. No, it's not. And,
I'm just quoting
an
Call of Duty.
automatic- Yeah, I know. I mean,
Okay.
so you mentioned a few things. Where do you get your news from? Forgive me, or your sources? What do you usually read?
CNN,
CNN,
Twitter.
CNN, Twitter, and a lot of professors probably here.
Probably.
Right. Everything that you have said here, and I say this respectfully, is incorrect. About the Australia buyback, the statistics about that, about the Second Amendment, now about assault rifles and automatic weapons. None of the shootings that we've discussed here, involved automatic weapons. Certainly not Florida. These are not automatic weapons. Automatic weapons are already heavily regulated. They're basically all but unattainable for the average
What did the
citizen.
Las Vegas guy use?
Yeah, he used semi-automatic
Okay.
weapons.
So semi-automatic. And switch that word. What about that? Why do
It's a
people
huge
need to have
difference.
that? I'm sorry, I didn't know, but
Do you want to explain to you what the difference is? Because
Sure.
that's really important, don't you think? Because you sat, here's something, and I appreciate you sitting down. But you sat down here, and you were willing to strip people of their rights. You were willing to say, listen, it's time to progress as a country, which I'll get to in a second, will cause countless more muggings, murders, rapes of innocent people, the likes of which you've never even been able to comprehend and didn't take into account. You were willing to remove the right of those innocent civilians to protect themselves based on completely faulty data and knowledge of things that simply aren't so. There's a huge difference between an automatic weapon, that's a machine gun, and a semi-automatic weapon. A semi-automatic weapon is every handgun. Pull the trigger once, it goes bang. That's a semi-automatic weapon. That's most hunting rifles. That's nearly all handguns that are used for self-defense. So my point is, if and I say this respectfully because a lot of people who've sat down, so this is not an insult, but almost everything that you just said is incorrect as a premise. And you were using that, or going up based on that knowledge, to justify the stripping of someone's ability to protect themselves. That is deeply
so what if
concerning to me.
So I obviously went to the extreme of just banning guns. What if we, improved our regulation, or
Okay.
improved our way of giving people access to these guns?
Okay, so we've got enough. So you would say now let's not ban guns.
So with respect, because you got to
Okay.
please everyone. So let's
Okay.
just say we want to, just take another step. Do you think we're at a good state where we're at right now?
Well, I don't want to. Let's just say, with what I just said, would you acknowledge now that just banning guns could have some real serious ramifications, and maybe you spoke a little too quickly on that. That might not be a good idea.
I'm sorry, what?
So would you agree with that? Maybe that's not a good idea to just ban guns.
Sure.
Okay. So what kind of regulations would you like to see, and why?
Just making it probably more difficult for people such as the Las Vegas shooter, the Orlando shooter, and things like that to get access to guns that can cause such, huge calamities to our country.
How would you do it?
What do you think? I'm asking you.
You're supposed to change my mind.
I mean, I'm just saying, we're not in a good place where we're at right now with regards to guns.
Really?
And from the statistics that I've seen, I don't know which ones you have, and I'd really love to look at the ones afterwards.
Absolutely, yeah.
And from what I've seen and what I've been convinced through that data is that America is not in a good place with regards to
Data
guns.
from
and we need
CNN and Twitter and professors is wrong. Okay, so I'm assuming you probably never purchased a firearm.
No, I haven't.
Okay. So if you purchase a firearm right now, they run a background check.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
If you're a criminal, if you're a felon, you can't get a gun.
Okay.
If you've committed violent misdemeanors, you can't get a gun.
Okay.
Domestic abuser, you can't get a gun. Mm-hmm. Legally declared mentally unfit, you can't get a gun.
Get or own? Meaning
you
just
cannot
can't obtain.
You cannot purchase a gun.
Okay.
Okay? So these already exist if you go to purchase a firearm. Now again, all these Twitter memes and stats, don't believe them.
I mean, it's not
don't mean
memes,
anything
it's
if
actual links to articles and whatnot.
Very, very factually
It's not
incorrect
just
articles.
someone. I mean, I could show you what I've read just literally just now. Where is it?
The point I'm making here is a lot of this would be very easily refuted by yourself if you'd ever purchased a firearm. You would know it's not. You would know it's not true because you've gone through the process. Everyone here who's ever purchased a firearm has gone through that process and knows that there are strict regulations. So we've gone from, okay, maybe banning all guns to how do we make it more difficult for people to purchase? Well, we already do those things. So what else would you do?
So why do people get guns? Like people that commit these crazy crimes. Like why is that still happening?
You're 19 times more likely to be knifed than ever shot in this country. So
I feel like you're 19.
People?
I'm just throwing fake statistic, but I feel like you're much more likely to survive getting stabbed than shot.
But the point is, why do people go out and stab people?
There's crazy people out there.
Yeah.
Well, what can we do as a country, in your opinion, Stephen? Right, Stephen?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
I just Googled you. What do you think we can take? What's our next step? Because we're obviously this just happened a week ago. So
I don't believe that
you think it's just something we should overlook.
Well, no, I think you've overlooked a lot of data.
Okay.
I think you've overlooked empirical evidence, and I think you're wanting to pass legislation through an emotive response right now. And I appreciate where you're coming from. I think it's an empathetic place, and I would hope that you believe where I'm coming from is an equally empathetic place. It's just a different solution. I believe that you want to save more lives.
Okay.
Now, what you have proposed to save more lives, we've started with literally completely stripping people of guns, which is very extreme. I believe that's what the left wants to do, though, so I appreciate you being honest. Maybe there's some legislation there that we do or don't know what it would look like. I've talked about this quite a bit today. Our goal is to save lives. How many lives are lost? You said we're in a really bad place with guns in our country right now.
Are we not?
No.
Are you going to say we're not?
No, I don't think
we're
we are.
okay.
I think we are. No, I'm not going to say perfect. I think a shooting is an absolute tragedy.
Is there room for improvement, or you think that we're just at a flat line where
there's always room for improvement? Certainly. I mean, when there are 39 incidents. Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
No, yeah, it is cold. My fingers freeze up a lot.
I think my mouth might be getting blue now. I've been out here for so long.
You got water.
Sorry, we were talking. Is there room for improvement? I think a man who had 39 reports, 2 tips to the FBI, blew away a chicken. This is a guy you're talking about, Florida, who legally should not have been able to purchase a firearm. Okay. But legally, you also can't go buy crack, right? People find ways around the law.
Yeah.
Okay?
No matter what, that's inevitable.
That's inevitable.
Okay.
That's inevitable. Now, as far as we're not in a good place in our country as it relates to firearms, that's not true. Overall, violent crime has been decreasing pretty consistently over the last several decades.
Where's the statistic? I don't believe that. What if I said I don't like this? I don't believe it.
I'll show you the statistics afterward. Okay. But you can even, if you would like to after this, Google violent crime statistics. They've been consistently decreasing. Okay. And the assault weapons ban, which was in place between 1994 and 2004, had no discernible effect at all on gun crime. Okay. How many? But let's look at something that hopefully we can just agree upon, because you're saying maybe I don't agree on your stats. I'll show them to you afterward, and hopefully we can find some common ground on that. Let's find something that's absolute that we can agree upon. Okay. How many lives do you know are lost to firearms each year in the United States?
I know it's in the thousands.
Yeah. If you include suicides, it's 30-something thousand. Okay. If you don't, it's anywhere from 12 to in the teens of thousands, depending on the source.
That's,
okay. So that sounds about right.
Something like that. Yeah.
So let's take the highest total, 30,000. Okay. Okay, including suicides. I don't really think it's fair to, but let's do that. What if I were to tell you that 500,000 meaning a minimum, to over 3 million lives each year saved by defensive use of firearms in the United States? That's according to the National Safety Council and CDC. Exponentially more lives saved through law-abiding citizens who own and keep firearms protecting themselves than lost.
Saved from what? What's the criteria for that?
Meaning lives saved, meaning active crime stopped from them using a firearm. And by the way, that doesn't necessarily include all the statistics of most of the time, if you own a firearm, you simply show that you brandished the firearm and criminals will move along down the trail. But innocent lives being saved, this is according to the CDC, National Safety Council, through defensive use of firearms. A low end of 500,000, they said potentially to over 3 million. So if we're talking about we're not in a good place
so you're saying
in our country,
we'll save more lives with more guns.
Would you at least entertain the idea that perhaps a way to save more innocent lives from being lost is encouraging firearm education and responsible firearm ownership? Considering the discrepancy, it's exponentially more likely that an innocent life is saved in the United States by a firearm.
So let's say there's that ratio of deaths prevented versus deaths caused by gun violence. Do you think that would decrease if there were more limitations on access to guns?
No.
How so?
Well, there's no evidence to suggest that it would.
I know. But I'm saying, like, just
I've got to listen. I've got to base my opinion based on two things. First
On
off,
factual
on the Second Amendment and the Constitution and how it's recognized. Okay.
Okay.
Because if you don't recognize that, then you don't have any rights, and I don't have any rights. Sounds to me like you enjoy some of the rights, but you don't necessarily agree with other rights. Then you have to base it on undeniable statistical, empirical data, and we have that. That's what forms my opinion, not how I feel or react based on a horrible tragedy. And no one here is saying that it isn't when that occurs. But you don't hear about those stories a lot.
It makes sense. I mean, I don't honestly, like, at the end of the day, like, I feel like if you just look at it from a common sense perspective, because you have your statistics and apparently I have mine, and I mean, honest, like, when you think about it, like, he just hit your camera. Oops. Okay.
Oh, a tolerant dude.
And real quick, I really respect what you're doing here.
Thank you very much.
I love
appreciate
that, despite our extremely, our extreme disagreement in certain things, I really respect that you're
man.
not even hiring your voice, and I really respect that
I
a
would
lot.
shake your hand, but
just a fist bump,
it's so
cold
cold.
bump.
See? Let me hold your hand to get it warmed up.
No, I really respect this. First
thank
of all,
you very much. No, and listen,
and I'm not
I did this
offended
here.
by anything you said, so I really appreciate that as well.
And here's the thing: if
And I like
you
you're out here
wanted to
educating
offend me, that's fine.
No, I mean, just I want to learn first
no,
of all,
I-
and
I
I've shown you
appreciate it.
where my perspective. I hope you understand where I'm coming from.
I understand where you're coming from, and I think here's the thing: I think you're an empathetic person who wants to save lives, right? And I'm just trying to tell you that first off, you can't save every life, right?
Okay.
That's where I believe you're coming from. I don't believe in ascribing a motive. You see this right now at the CNN town hall. Why don't you care about the lives lost? No, why don't these people care about the lives saved? I mean, a good example is we don't hear about. Remember the Sutherland Springs shooting? That was right here in Texas. You know what happened there, right? Does the name Stephen Williford mean anything to you?
No.
Okay. So I have a show. It's called Lotto with Crowder.
Okay.
Stephen Williford was someone I interviewed on my show.
Okay.
This was after you remember the Sutherland Springs shooting?
I've heard of it. I don't remember
It killed
exactly.
far more people than the one in Florida.
Okay.
Deadly shooting in Sutherland Springs, just outside of San Antonio, Texas.
Okay.
Sutherland Springs.
Sutherland.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sutherland Springs? Yeah, Sutherland. Sorry, I said Sutherford because it's Stephen Williford. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so this was a very deadly shooting that occurred at a church. This was within the last 4 months. Now, I'm sure you've seen all the press, obviously, after Florida, boycott the NRA, gun control now, the CNN town hall. Stephen Williford is someone we interviewed on our show, okay? The reason I interviewed him on our show, this lowly little podcast, was because no one else was really even calling him. No one else really wanted to hear his story. Do you know who Stephen Williford is?
No.
He's the man who stopped the active shooter with an AR-15.
Okay.
It was a man shooting up a church. An evil man shooting up a church. And Stephen Williford, who is a hero, shot him with an AR-15 and stopped it. The media didn't even interview
So I
him.
guess, are you saying like everyone should get an AR-15?
No, I'm not saying everyone should get an AR-15. But what I am saying is you say you have your facts and you have your data, and then you acknowledge that perhaps you're misinformed on some of these issues. You mentioned CNN.
Okay.
Why didn't CNN have Stephen Williford on? This was a more deadly shooting carried out against a church here in Texas. Stephen Williford, he wasn't some kid who happened to be maybe even a different wing of the school or wasn't even there that day. This was the man who personally stopped the active shooter. You don't even know his name. Should that maybe illuminate that there's a bias in today's media that isn't giving you the full story? And if you don't believe me on anything, you can go watch my interview with Stephen Williford, and you can go Google the Sutherland Springs shooting and Stephen Williford. It was an unbelievably deadly shooting. And he stopped it with an AR-15.
I mean, I still go back to my initial thing, like more guns equals more deaths by gun. Like, you can't tell me that's incorrect.
It is incorrect.
How?
I just
I mean, like,
told you
no,
how.
I mean, I get
because
it,
more
but, like-
lives are saved by firearms. More lives are saved by defensive uses of firearms. And there is no statistical data to suggest, you started with let's just get rid of the Second Amendment.
I mean,
then maybe let's get rid of
yeah.
automatics.
Okay.
Then maybe semi-automatics. So again, either way, and I think what we found here is no matter any way you slice it, for you to change, you have to do away with the Second Amendment and ban guns. It's not about automatic. It's not about a bump stock. Semi-automatic, now it's all guns. People either have the right to protect themselves or they don't. And there is no data to say that stripping people of the right to self-protection would make us safer. As a matter of fact, there is some data to suggest otherwise. New York, Chicago, places with California, places with very strict gun laws, are some of the most violent gun crime in the country.
Okay, I understand. I guess it makes it look that I'm saying that guns don't protect people. Guns are this and that, and like all they bring is harm. But I'm saying that I still believe, until I look at those statistics that you're talking about, I still fully believe that more access to guns is going to lead to more psychotic people getting through the system that we currently have. I mean, at least you would have to agree that we need some type of change with regards to regulation. You can't tell me we're fine and we're doing okay and
I certainly would do away with some things. For example, I would do away with 30-day waiting periods for firearms.
Oh yeah?
I would do away with that. I would do away with people not being able to purchase suppressors for hunting. I believe it would be more safe if people can. So you just think
we shouldn't limit the type of audience that gets access to guns?
No, we already do.
You don't think we don't need any more of a limitation? Okay, so let me ask you, what ways or what avenues can we take to ensure that things like Las Vegas won't happen again?
You can never ensure that things like Las Vegas won't happen.
Or at least that bad.
All you can do, here's the thing, and we talked about this on the program not long ago. Human beings commit horrible acts of evil. Okay? You can never stop them from doing that. Mm-hmm. You ban guns in Australia, violent crime is the same. In the UK, violent crime has gone up. People find a way. Look at we're actually. Okay, so I mean, there were shootings in France. Look at Nice. Look at what's happened. Look at the terrorist attacks. You can't stop it.
Does UK have more gun deaths than we do? I'm pretty sure they don't.
They have more violent crime. Now here's something else that's also important. Comparing violent crime statistics across countries is very difficult because they have different standards for violent crime. If you look in the United States, places with the strictest gun laws have some of the worst gun crime. Now, as far as I'm not so concerned with just gun crime. I'm concerned with violent crime. Okay. Violent crime, there is a statistical correlation between violent crime increasing and populaces being unarmed, being stripped of the ability to protect themselves. You even look at states where people carry firearms, or people are more likely to carry arms freely. They are less likely to be targeted, less likely to be attacked. There is often lower violent crime. So there are plenty of statistical correlations there. No one is saying that we are perfect, but I think human evil, I think we both acknowledge evil is a part of the human condition. You have some evil in you, so do I. People have evil in them, people have good in them. I believe all people have all of the above. So people who get overrun with evil, they will commit acts of evil. It comes down to what's the best way to prevent that. Either you believe in disarming all good people and also doing away with the Constitution and the rights that afford us everything else, such as the ability to peaceably assemble and speak freely, or you believe that allowing good people to protect themselves is a solution. Okay.
I don't know. I guess we'll agree to disagree to some extent. I understand. I'm glad you educated me a little bit on the positive side of guns, but I still feel like the fact that there's 17, 18-year-old kids that got killed.
That's terrible.
I feel like we need to do something.
That's terrible, but what about the millions of...
why don't you get, the NRA to do something about that?
What about the hundreds of thousands or millions of mothers who protect their children at home when dad's gone and someone breaks in, or the women who protect themselves from being raped? Right? You're talking about 500,000 to over 3 million. So you can't just look... Would we agree? You can't legislate emotionally. Do you feel less empathetic to that woman? Do you feel less empathetic to the child who was protected by a firearm? I don't think so. And just as I don't feel less empathetic to those lives lost. Yeah. So let me ask you this before we go. Okay. If you were able to research these things, and if the facts that I presented bore out, and you said, okay, that checks out, would that perhaps change or educate your opinion on firearms and Second Amendment a little differently?
Not completely, probably, but to an extent. Okay. Possibly, yeah.
To an extent. All right. Sure. Let's. This is actually probably there's a whole lot. No, we don't need to do this right now.
Okay. Yeah.
But so. Okay. All right. Sorry. Here. Okay. Here. If you want to write this down here, let me do this.
Take a picture, or is it actually right?
Write down. If you write down these notes. Sorry, everyone. I'm actually giving, just real quick, we'll continue. I'm giving him some notes on stats to research on his own because he's really open and hunger for knowledge, and I appreciate that, so I'll take some time with him. Okay. Google CDC, lives saved guns. CDC, or you can Google how many guns saved per year. Yes. You can Google Australian buyback, actual effect, or Australian buyback,
So
violent crime.
Okay, so let me ask you, why are there articles that are suggesting that
Well, you know what?
it's exponentially decreased?
Does someone have my phone here? Let me show you something really quickly, because this even happens with me, by the way, and I do this professionally, okay? And like I said, as someone who works in the media and as someone who was on mainstream media for a long time, Fox News, CNN did it for a long time, it's not always very honest.
Okay.
I even get caught in the sense that mass shootings, I knew these numbers were wrong, okay? So this is something that's been going around, it's been retweeted by people at CNN. This has been retweeted and posted tens of thousands of times, right? Mm-hmm. Gun massacres fell during the assault weapons ban, okay?
Okay.
But here's the thing. They're using I was going, that doesn't make sense, because I've looked at this number at least 50 times. I've used it, I've sourced it. Mm-hmm. What they did was they took 6+ deaths.
Okay.
The standard used is actually 4+.
So
it's been used for a long time. It changes the statistics completely. Those were the standards that were originally set. So you have to look at the source. It comes from Louis Clarivis. Now, I can show you what it is from, and then I do have to let other people come in here.
Yeah.
But this is what is actually used as government standard.
So no
the standard
change.
for mass shootings. As a matter of fact, looks like it went up. Now, here's the thing. I'm being fair. If you look at that, right? I don't think that the assault weapons ban necessarily increased gun crime, because there's a statistical quote. It was going up regardless, and now it's been going down a little bit. So I'm not going so far the other way and say, look, the assault weapons ban increased gun crime.
Okay.
I think that's a more balanced point of view.
Okay.
But it certainly didn't decrease it. That's using the legal standards. Anyone can create a statistic and they just say, well, hold on a second, I'm going to include 6+. Well, why don't you include 4+? That's what's been used to compare across different countries. So those are studies that have been used. So often people will tweak that data to change the number. Little tricks like that occur all the time.
That's the assault rifle ban that you're...
Assault Weapons Ban
Assault
Act.
Weapons Ban Act.
Was 94 to 2004.
And the definition of a massacre is 4+?
It was 4+, yeah.
Then why did 6+ decrease? Or is that just like a...
Well, then you have to get into again, you look at the numbers, how many more, the reason they included 4+ was because there was a lot between 4 and 6. Okay. Do we care less about those lives? Is that not considered a massacre? So no, I'm not saying that you do, but my point is that people are dishonest and tweak the data all the time, and so that's why I think it's important to actually just look at overall.
I mean, it's not just that,
yeah, but the undeniable fact is violent crime. You have to look at violent crime, not just gun crime. Overall violent crime, and you have to look at how many lives are saved. And then I would also recommend that you purchase a firearm. Just even if you return it, go through the process. I think you'll change your point of view even more. I think you'll realize it's significantly more difficult than you think. I know my opinion changed. I'm Canadian.
Okay.
Dual citizen. Was raised in Montreal. When I first purchased a firearm, I was told it's easier than buying a pack of cigarettes. It's not true. So if you can buy a firearm,
it's pretty easy compared to
it's not that easy.
Other countries. It's much easier.
Well, compared to other countries that don't allow you to own firearms, period, of course. But in Canada, we invented the mass shooting in Canada. We had 3 at schools, just in my hometown of Montreal.
Anyways.
All right, I do have to let other people in. Yeah. I appreciate you, man, taking the time. What's your name? Iman. Okay, nice to meet you, Iman. Do you mind if I eat a little bit while we're going? Because I've been sitting out here for hours.
Yeah, I totally understand.
Okay. Would you mind scooching in a little bit, just so otherwise I'm gonna throw out my shoulder.
I got you.
So, let me is that a bird?
I don't.
It was pretty loud. Okay. Let me reassert my position just to make sure there's no miscommunication here. I am an avid supporter of the Second Amendment and firearm ownership. I come from a country where that's not a legally recognized right, like Canada. I am open to new ideas and having my mind changed.
Okay. Well, I believe that you have your right to own a gun. That's not a problem. Now, I just think that the ease of accessibility of having a gun is the problem. And, this culture that we have surrounding owning a gun is, a bit problematic. And, that's my position. I think you have a right to own a gun.
Okay.
But not military grade, things that cause mass shootings.
Okay. How would you define military grade?
Assault rifles.
What's an assault rifle?
So AK-47.
Okay. Now, why would you differentiate between, say, an AK-47 and a Ruger Mini 31?
Like pistols?
No, it's a common hunting rifle.
Right. I'm not sure what you're asking. I apologize.
Well, I guess I'm asking because you're the one who's proposing, I assume, a ban on military standard you just use the term assault rifle?
Right. We don't need to have them like among citizens. I suppose people who have military training could have those because they're under jurisdiction, they've been trained, they've had background checks, etc. But regular citizens, such as a 19-year-old boy, it doesn't make sense that he had that gun legally.
Sorry. Couple things. You do have to go through a background check to legally purchase a firearm. It's not exclusive to the military. And again, I think it's important for you to define what military spec would be. So you mean things like AR-15s?
Yes.
That were used in the shootings? Okay.
I forgot the name.
Oh,
Sorry, I
okay,
apologize.
An AR-15 is not a military rifle.
Okay.
They use M16s. An AR-15 is not an automatic weapon. So I think it's important when people are proposing gun control legislation it's important for me to understand what it is that you're proposing.
Right.
So when you say X guns shouldn't be in the hands of citizens, I would really like to, just so I'm not misrepresenting your point of view, and so I can know whether I appropriately agree or not, what kind of firearms specifically would you remove from law-abiding citizens or bar them from in-house?
So AR-15, right? What kind of gun is that?
An AR-15 is a rifle.
Right. So I would believe
A
that
semi-automatic rifle.
Right. Semi-automatics would be something that don't need to be in the hands of citizens.
Okay. So no handguns.
I mean, the thing is that like handguns and pistols have different like caliber compared to semi-automatics or automatic guns and semi-automatics. The thing that kid used, like it was much more of a severe type than say just a handgun. No?
No, and Virginia Tech was just committed with handguns. Let me ask you, are you aware of what the differentiation is between automatic and semi-automatic?
No.
And by the way, I'm not trying to be a smart ass in this at all,
yeah.
but a lot of people have
I'm
sat
just
down
like-
and said this, and they don't know. And that's, honestly, it's because of the disservice from the media in deliberately conflating them.
Okay.
So, a fully automatic weapon, machine gun would be, pull the trigger, it keeps firing until the magazine is empty. A semi-automatic would include all pistols.
Okay.
It's pull the trigger once, a bullet comes out. Bang,
Right.
bang, bang.
Right.
That's most hunting rifles. So that's why I say, the AR-15, by the way, uses a caliber .223, which is really a glorified varmint caliber. It's actually not the most powerful caliber out there. It's not even close. Most hunting rifles that people use to take down deer are actually significantly more powerful, as well as being semi-automatic.
Okay.
The vast majority of mass shootings are carried out not using rifles at all, just using run-of-the-mill handguns, which happen to be semi-automatic. So, does any of that, I guess, change your point of view? Because you were under the presumption that these were military-style rifles and semi-automatics, knowing that you would effectively be removing. The only way you could do it is saying, okay, a ban on all firearms.
Or what about a ban on certain firearms rather than all?
Okay, well, that comes back to how do you determine which firearms. Let me do this, I guess, first, because then we can get into, it seems to me that, like you said, you don't know a whole lot about firearms. I'm not an expert necessarily by any means. I was raised in Canada. How much of an expert can I be on firearms? But I've learned quite a bit in becoming a responsible firearm owner. What do you believe the Second Amendment is?
I think it's a right to defend ourselves.
Okay.
Right? Self-defense. In the case of, in the case of a need of self-defense, right? But mass shootings, those aren't self-defense.
Well, no, but that's a crime, right? Mass shooting.
Right.
I'm saying, but before we get into that's a crime, and we both agree. Listen, none of us, no one here is advocating for mass shootings. I want to make sure that we agree on that, and I appreciate you sitting down and keeping it civil. We've had people just come by and scream and knock the camera, so I want to make sure you understand I am very anti-mass shooting or criminal behavior.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. But you said the Second Amendment is for defense. I think we need to fundamentally find out where we agree first before then we determine where we disagree.
Okay.
So the Second Amendment you believe is for defense, but how so? Defense against what?
Attackers. I believe I was talking to some people out there, and they said that like in case the government goes against you, you can use guns as a self-defense as well.
And was that the first time you'd heard that concept?
Mm-hmm.
So you'd never heard before about the Second Amendment being a safeguard against a tyrannical government?
Yeah.
Okay, that's why it was written.
Right.
That's the whole purpose for it. So with that context, you have to understand at that point they were basically ensuring just like the First Amendment, your freedom of speech. Remember, you can run off right now and say, I hate him, he was mean, he's terrible, and you have the right to say it. I would prefer that you didn't, but the Constitution says you have that right. The Constitution also ensured that the citizens had the right to arm themselves. By the way, the same kind of armaments that the military had at that point. That's what it was for. It was for protection against both internal and external threats. Government, and of course to protect your farm, your family, your property. That's why it exists. So that's what the Second Amendment ensures.
Okay.
I guess since that was the first time you'd heard that, but can we, I guess, agree on that as a starting off point?
I suppose. I think my only issue with it is that there's like a very like, it's a culture. Like, defense of guns and having guns is a very American culture. Like, why isn't this a problem in, say, Australia, where they had enacted a gun ban, a ban on assault rifles, I believe, and then they administered a buyback program where over 650,000 guns were bought back, and their homicide rates and suicide rates by gun violence dropped significantly.
A couple of things I'd like to unpack there. Two things. You said, why do we have this culture in the United States?
Right.
Now, I'll acknowledge, for example, where I'm from in Canada is different than the United States. So why is there a gun culture in the United States? Because you have other societies who kneeled for royalty, who didn't fight off a tyrannical government. We left, and in order to make sure that you're free to practice your religion, in order to make sure that you're free to speak. By the way, that's also not a right in Australia or Canada. Freedom of speech doesn't exist anywhere else outside of the United States. Not to its full capacity. A lot of people don't realize that. They go hand in hand. We were the country who fled the world's greatest superpower one century, only to become the world's greatest superpower the next century. That's never happened to that degree. And that's because we were a country founded on the idea of private citizens being able to own firearms. We fought off a tyrannical government. We didn't submit to them. So that will change the culture, just as you see a different culture in Japan versus Germany, right? There are cultural differences. When you're a culture born through violence, and I would say virtuous violence, I would say it certainly was virtuous violence to fight a war to end slavery. When we agree, you can commit acts of violence that are morally virtuous, and you can commit acts of peace that are morally reprehensible.
Right.
You can peacefully sign a warrant for millions of people to die, and that has happened. So that is why. There's a fundamental mistrust of government. We fought off a government, and we wanted to ensure that we would be able to do that in the future. Because George Washington, actually George Mason said, who is the militia? It's in the Second Amendment. He said, why, it's the whole people. George Washington fought off militias. You know, there are all kinds of warring militias when this country was founded. The easiest thing he could have done would have been, all right, ban guns, no more militias. George Washington didn't. You know why? Because he said, I need them to keep us in check. Our founding fathers understood, since they had just fled and fought off tyranny, that it can happen within one generation. It can happen within less than a decade. So that's why it's ingrained into our culture. It's a different culture. You may not agree with it, but that's why the Second Amendment exists. Does that answer maybe your question as to why it's culturally different?
Right, but I believe maybe the culture was different back then, like the context is different now.
Okay, well, let's get to that, because I wanted to get to your second issue. You mentioned Australia. So you mentioned a buyback.
Buyback program.
It was a mandatory buyback. Yeah, so it's a gun ban. It's interesting to me that then you said, well, and then gun suicides and gun crime went down.
Or guns by gun-related suicides and gun-related homicides.
Okay.
But they didn't completely ban guns, because they did, I think if I'm not mistaken, they did enact a new permit system.
Right, but it's a mandatory buyback.
Right.
You could say it's like if I put a ban on all epauletted black coats right now, and it's a mandatory buyback where you have to turn that in, or I'm going to send government men with guns, by the way, ironically, to your house to take your jacket. That's a ban, right?
Right.
You don't have a choice in the matter. Then you can say afterward, well, we're going to make you get this tax stamp, and we're going to make you go through this process, and you can get your pretty black jacket back. You wouldn't say, oh, okay, that's a real respect for my rights there, Mr. Government. I appreciate it. It's pretty rough. So it was a mandatory buyback. Then you mentioned that there was a decrease in gun homicides and suicides. First off, there's conflicting data there that it didn't affect gun crime at all.
That, yeah.
But there's certainly no conflicting data that it did not affect violent crime. So the question becomes, if someone kills himself with a gun, or if someone kills himself with a knife, you're 19 times, for example, more likely to be knifed. My concern is with violent crime. It's not necessarily a gun, and it shows you that it doesn't matter what you do with guns, violent crime remains unchanged.
Right.
Now, what does change for example, in the United States, is that there are far more defensive uses of firearms that save far more lives than they take. So the question becomes, I think, because you're empathetic, you're kind of. I don't say this. I don't want to be arrogant. I think you're learning some historical context for the Second Amendment, hopefully. And I would encourage you to go read it. Don't take my word for it.
Yeah, no, seriously.
Like LeVar Burton. Don't take my word for it. Don't you hate it when he does that in Reading Rainbow and then some 6-year-old that's like, oh, I'm supposed to take a 6-year-old's recommendation?
Yeah.
So don't take my word for it. So then now it comes back to the issue. If it didn't necessarily work, understanding why we have the Second Amendment now, are you still comfortable with stripping people of their rights to protect themselves?
I don't think that's the issue with I guess talking to you, it boils down to like this really intense culture around guns and having them, and like the context has changed now, so we're not as afraid of our government turning on us anymore as we were. We're more afraid of mass shootings and people turning on each other.
I think that's very misguided.
Why?
You're more afraid of a mass shooting than government overreach?
Yes, I suppose so. You mean by government overreach as in government takes over?
Infringing upon your rights, yeah, tyrannical government. I think, how old are you, if you don't mind me asking? 18. Oh, really? Okay, 18. Well, there you go. You're a very sharp young lady at 18. Very well spoken. You just haven't lived through it. It doesn't take a lot. I mean, you understand that can happen very quickly. It's still happening across the world right now.
Right.
Tyrannical governments. I mean, you can see how quickly a government can change. Look at Turkey. Right? Look at Iran in the 70s and Iran today. I mean, rights are removed like that, like clockwork. You see it with Australia, a gun buyback, a mandatory gun buyback. These people were obeying the law one second, and then were fugitives from the law the next because someone decides to change a law. This happens all the time, and in the realm of human history, major global conflicts, it's not that long ago.
But I mean...
and the only way we're the only country to say, hey, we recognize the human condition. Right. We recognize that human beings are inherently capable of evil and being corrupted, so let's safeguard against that and make sure that every individual has the right to protect themselves, because that's the fundamental worldview, right?
Right.
Do you believe that good people have the right to protect themselves against bad people, whether that's government or a gang member?
Well, that's too hard to think about, to be honest. Like, I think that argument that the only thing that stops a bad guy with the gun is a good guy with the gun, I think that's a little bit shaky to think about, just
Why?
Because that doesn't make much sense to me. You can't always I don't know, I think that argument isn't as valid as it could be. I had some stats in my head, but I forgot.
It's okay.
Sorry, I haven't
these cameras do that to you. Okay, let me ask you this. If I were able to provide you with irrefutable evidence that is true, as well as anecdotal evidence, would you consider changing your opinion?
I suppose, but it would depend on the source as well.
Okay, all right. Let me give you the information in the source, and I would encourage you to Google it afterwards. How many guns do you believe in the United States? Sorry, how many lives do you believe are taken by guns in the United States each year?
You're going to say 300,000, aren't you?
No.
No?
No. How many lives? No.
Really?
No, that's way too high.
Really?
Yeah.
Wait, okay.
Lives taken by guns.
I'm not sure. I can't approximate.
If you include suicide, it's in the 30,000.
30,000. I got
30,000 range. That's good. Yeah.
Sorry.
Take it and multiply it by 10.
I was listening a lot, so.
And then it's if you take away suicide, it's anywhere from 12,000 to 16,000, depending which source you use. Now, how many lives, how many people are saved each year in the United States through defensive uses of firearms?
I'm not sure. Are you gonna?
Yes.
Wait, would you repeat your question, please?
How many defensive uses of firearms would you say occur in the United States? Meaning lives saved, people saved, protected through legal defensive use of firearms each year. So we've just established about, 12 to 16,000, excluding suicide, lives are taken.
Oh, okay.
But how many are saved?
I'm not sure.
Minimum 500,000.
Really?
Likely over 3 million each year, according to the CDC.
Okay.
So I'd say that's a legitimate source, right? It's not CNN, this is the CDC, a National Safety Council. So you're talking exponentially higher numbers of people whose lives are saved through defensive use of firearms than lives are ever taken.
But that still negates the idea that people are still able to go out and commit mass shootings, which I think under the definition mass shooting includes 4 people or more that are killed by the gun.
That's correct, yeah.
Right.
As a matter of fact, I appreciate you say that, because now they've tried to tweak the numbers and say it's 6 or more to make it seem as though the assault weapons ban worked when it didn't. The number's always been 4 or more, so I appreciate that you use that. Yeah, but again, it's such an outlier mass shootings. as far as the statistical likelihood of death in the United States, or even when it comes to gun crime. When you remove suicides, it's very, very low, and then when you remove gang-on-gang violence, it's even lower. The statistical likelihood of you being shot is unbelievably low, and it is much lower if you have a firearm yourself that you can use defensively.
Okay, so then what if we brought the argument that about this this kid that had like a closet full of guns and was able to go into his school and shoot a bunch of people? Why is it that a kid has guns?
Okay. Well, first off, there was like 39 warning to shoot on this kid. 39 incidents reported, 2 reported to the FBI. They think he blew away like a chicken with a handgun. This kid was not supposed to
Killing
legally
frogs.
have fire. Yeah, I know. That's like,
Yeah.
if your neighbor's killing frogs, you might want to make a phone call. That is people failing to do their job. Legally, can't own a firearm. And that's why I would say, you've never purchased a firearm, I would assume, right?
No.
I would encourage you to do so. And listen, go to a firing range, learn how to shoot a gun. At the very least, if you ever run into a situation where you're near a firearm or have to use it, so you have proper safety training. I encourage everyone to do that. And if you go purchase a firearm, you'll see the background check that has already taken place. You'll see that you can't purchase a firearm if you're a felon. You'll see you can't purchase it if you even have committed violent misdemeanors or domestic abuse, or if you've been ruled mentally defective. You go through this background check. I have had to go through it every single time I purchase a firearm.
Are you sure that's the same in all different states?
Yes, this is a federal background check. Now, if we're talking about some, for example, these FBI tips, or in the case of a military tribunal where someone just wasn't reported, that is the failure of someone to do their job. That doesn't require new legislation. That requires people obeying legislation. And then we get into the issue of, listen, criminals break the law. And sometimes people fail to do their job. And guess what? People who fail to do their job in these instances are in government. So again, we're talking about the gross incompetency of government, and the solution is to put more power in the hands of the government by disarming private citizens. I just think it's a fundamentally flawed premise. One final thing I find interesting. So that's the empirical, the evidence. Far more lives saved than taken. I would encourage you to go research it.
Okay.
Let me ask you this. If you go and search that and you find that bears out from the CDC, would that change your opinion on the Second Amendment at all?
I'm still not sure. It's a very murky issue, to be honest.
Well, you started off pretty confident, and now you're not sure. So
Well, I think
you were going to change my
I
mind. It
just-
sounds like we're coming like this, a little coming closer.
I suppose. I think that I still stand that you still can have a right to a gun, but it does not need to be nearly as accessible as it is currently.
I still haven't heard any different proposal outside of a gun ban, because you said that, but then you bring up Australia,
Just
which is
like-
a gun ban, and then the Second Amendment. So I would encourage you to look at those sources. Let's assume those are true. I would like to think a sharp 18-year-old lady such as yourself would look at that and that overwhelming statistical evidence and say, okay, this needs to play a part in my decision. But obviously you'll make your own decisions. And then we go to the anecdotal. You talk about how this idea of a good guy with a gun stopping with a bad guy with a gun, I think is just, you think is incorrect. So obviously you mentioned the Florida shooting. Do you remember the Sutherland Springs shooting? You don't remember the Sutherland Springs? This is not. I'm amazed. It happened here in Texas, and it was more deadly than Florida.
Really?
The church was shut up. Church was shut up in Sutherland Springs, outside of San Antonio, Texas. This just
No, I
happened
don't recall.
only a few months ago. Yeah, deadlier shooting.
Well, there's so many been happening.
No. There haven't been so many happening, and this was one of the biggest. Does the name Stephen Williford mean anything to you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm trying to think of how to frame this here. I don't want to be contentious at all, but I think, let me put it this way. I think it is a tremendous disservice that has been committed against you from the media and probably this educational establishment for you to be this uninformed on some of these pivotal issues. The Sutherland Springs shooting was more deadly. It was a church that was shot up, okay? In Texas, not that far from here. And Stephen Williford, you don't know him because he wasn't on the news, wasn't a story. I'm sure you've probably seen the high school students, right, from Florida, going around making the rounds. Well, Stephen Williford is the man who stopped the shooter. He stopped the shooter with an AR-15. He was an NRA certified instructor.
Okay.
No town hall. Media didn't talk about it. More deadly shooting happened in your backyard. You don't even know about it. Does that concern you? Because that was a good guy with a gun, stopping a bad guy with a gun.
But then that's just one incident.
Happens all no. Then that's why I'm combining that with the statistical evidence that there are far more lives, as I talked about from the CDC. So the evidence, the preponderance of evidence, points to far more lives saved than taken. And I'm just trying to give you an anecdotal example of a more deadly shooting that occurred recently in a place that's closer to you. The media didn't cover.
I mean, and then
that's
they're
really
just talking
alarming.
about the media really and like what they cover and not.
Well,
So-
but the point is, that would be concerning to me. If this is the first time you're learning that the Second Amendment is to protect yourself against a tyrannical government, I think that's pretty pivotal. I'm kind of surprised I wasn't taught in American history class. I was Canadian. I learned Canadian history, so I felt it's incredibly boring. It's like we said, all right, give, and now we have the Queen on our money. But they don't teach the Second Amendment in American history in schools. I find that concerning. I find it concerning that people think we're in a worse place with guns than ever, that we have more gun crime than ever. I find it concerning that you're clearly a very smart girl, and I don't say that to patronize you. But I find it concerning that someone as articulate, as smart as you, isn't aware of how many lives are saved through use of firearms, why we have the right to firearms, and then, in particular, a news story that the media really should go gaga over that occurred in your home state where you are studying, where a man saved lives with a firearm.
But isn't it? I'm so sorry.
No, I was just saying that's very. I find that very. Does that not?
I know it
not
is quite
concerning?
concerning, but isn't it more concerning that? I was doing research on this last night, but because according to I think the United Nations and the Human Development Index that in the United States we're 22.9 times more. Have 22.9 more homicides per million people than, say, Germany or Switzerland, which was like 7.7 and I think 9 for both of those. So isn't that more alarming as well?
Well, I think you're referring to gun homicide.
Right.
Yeah. Because violent crime rates...
Gun-related homicides.
Yeah, I think what's important to compare... First off, one thing I do have to say, and I'll go along with that, just for the sake of us having this discussion, violent crime rates are difficult to compare across countries because they're different standards. Kind of like infant mortality rates.
Right.
People have different standards for what actually is considered an infant. But violent crime is actually higher and has seen a worse trend in places like the UK than in the United States. And in Sweden, particularly, and in Germany, things like rape have been increasing while they've actually been going down in the United States. These are very alarming crimes. Now, if you're just talking about gun crime, okay, but you're 19 times more likely to be stabbed than shot. Again, the numbers are so minimal, but the media focuses on it. I think it's more important to focus on the overall crime trends and violent crime, not the tool of the crime. Because if you're going to attribute all of these issues to an inanimate object and ignore the totality of evidence, I think you're looking in the wrong place.
Okay, I understand that.
And also something else. I mean, keep in mind that, we're also the only place out of all those places you mentioned that has freedom of speech, where you can't be jailed for saying something offensive. So that's amendment number 1.
Okay.
And amendment number 2.
All right.
Don't own a firearm. So it comes down to, I think, your fundamental view of human rights, and then the statistical data and realities of gun violence, and where you line up on that. But it sounds to me like you're doing some research. Hopefully you continue to do more. I really do encourage you to fact check me after this.
Right.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
No, I had a document there. I just straight up forgot it.
You can just tweet me and tell me if you think I'm, hey, you were wrong, you suck, and I get that all the time. But I don't think you probably. I know you seem like a very nice person. So. Would that, though, if you go and you do this research and everything that I've said here, let's say, is mostly true, does it maybe change your view a little bit?
Probably not within this discussion. As shortly, I can't just radically change my views.
No, not within this discussion. But if you go home and do this research and...
Well, yeah, because then I have more context.
Okay.
But, probably not now. I'm still
No, I don't want you to right now. That's also why I don't think we should be proposing legislation right now. I don't think an emotive response, a knee-jerk response, is... conducive toward productive legislation in any capacity, or even productive formation of opinions. So I don't want you to knee jerk. I don't want you to develop an opinion right now. Sit, let it percolate a little bit, go do some research. I would encourage you to look up the Sutherland Springs shooting. I would encourage you to Google CDC lives saved firearms, or CDC defensive use firearms, and see where you line up. But okay. I appreciate you so much taking the time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.